Good morning, everybody. So today we're going to talk about simple systematic training. And this topic came out of kind of the last couple of webinars. After every webinar, I ask people to send me ideas of what they'd like to see. And so this one came out on the top of what people wanted to do. And a little bit of background, my first training organizational program I put in place was like 1985. And tried a lot of things since then and found that this is the easiest way that you can get training up and running, make it effective, make it last. The program I created in 85 is still running today, and get training implemented and going in a matter of weeks and not months. So when we talked last month, and be curious to know how many of the folks who are on right now also were on the January one, because I previewed this and asked everybody from January if you wanted this to sign up. So it'd be interesting if you want to send in the comments if you were part of our repeat and you were here in January. But we talked about the ideas of actual changing behavior. And through that, training is not the goal, okay? We don't train people just to train them. We train them because we want to actually change the behaviors. We want them to do and use what they know, because as we talked about in the past, when you use, like we make New Year's resolutions, how many of you know that you have these New Year's resolutions, get up earlier, work out harder, whatever you're going to do, and it doesn't happen? Just to know something doesn't mean that it changes things. And then it kind of comes down to, is it a will versus skill? And so if there is actually a skill area or a training area or whatnot, then the standardized training process, and we're going to talk about the simple idea of training checklists, then documented behavioral-based competencies, we set these clear expectations, and then how to actually develop this with something called a DACM, which is an acronym that stands for developing a curriculum. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, can everybody hear me okay? Out there, a show of clicks. Ask you along the way, because we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. Hey, I think going backwards there. Okay, so developing a curriculum is the idea of you select an occupation or role that requires training of some kind, and then you identify the subject matter experts, you facilitate the process, you develop and link resources, and then you implement and utilize. Then you manage, track, and refresh. So let's talk about each of these steps and how to do it in a really simple way that doesn't take a lot of time and is very, very effective. So the first thing you want to kind of do is conduct an organizational analysis. You want to just kind of look at saying, who are all the organizations and what's my biggest need? And what often happens, why training programs die. I mean, I bet you right now, if you're in your office, you can look around and you can identify binders of training you went to in the past, and that binder is still sitting on the shelf and you haven't opened it since the class. And so you want to kind of think about what it is that's actually going to be used, efficient. And so you conduct an organizational analysis, and you're not going to develop training for everybody and everything. Use the 80-20 rule. What is the 20% of the kind of things you got to get done that are going to solve 80% of your problems? Then we're going to conduct what's called a role performance analysis. And then you're going to conduct a task analysis. And I'll talk about what each one of these things are. So if you're not a training professional and you're a programmer or you're a project manager or something else, it'll make it really simple. So you play many, many roles, and there's a difference between an occupation and a role. So an occupation is a job or a profession. It's what you were hired to do. And we often hear people interchange the word job with duty or task. And so just for clarity, when we say job, we're talking about an occupation. So I'm a programmer, I am a manager, I am a whatever it is. And a role is the function assumed by a person or thing in a given action or process. So occupation is a job, and then a role is a function or something someone's doing. So if you look at this organization, you are many, many groups and within the company. And each area will have different systems, processes, and equipment that they're going to work on that's to meet their goals. And then individuals are expected, based on their jobs, to know and operate what's within their role. And then, so you may be assigned an occupation, but you may have many roles. So in this one, we have people that are a member of the research team, but then part of the leadership team, they're part of the company, and they also have the role of team lead. They could also be a programmer who's a team lead. Then you could have somebody else who is on the same team, and they are maybe a first responder or cross-functional teams. And so roles, you have many, many roles. You have one occupation. And then we have these things called QCLs, which are qualification checklists. And a qualification checklist, some people call them training checklists. Sometimes they call them, task lists. I typically go with qualification checklists because training, like I said before, you could be trained and still not doing the job. So I know it up here, but I'm not proficient at playing it or doing what it is that I'm doing. So qualification is kind of a way of saying you know it, you're experienced at it, and you can do it. And so we have these groups. Groups are made up of subgroups. Each subgroup has people that play different roles. And then they have duties. And then from the duties and the tasks. And so the qualification checklists are developed for the roles and to set what we initially very clear expectations. So instead of making one big checklist for everything a job does, it's way better to break it down into what we'll call manageable chunks. Shorter checklists make training easier and easier to track and easier to assign with cross-functional. So using multiple small checklists is much more beneficial than just one giant mega checklist. And then you want to create these checklists for tasks that span multiple jobs or teams or departments. So if I am creating a first responder checklist, there might be someone who's a first responder in many different departments. So they have their other job, and then they have all of the other elements that are the first responder. They're qualified on those, but other folks don't necessarily have to have that and still be in the same department. So that's why making it for the role and not for the job. And if someone changes roles or jobs, the training easily transfers because a lot of the skills and knowledge that you learned is also applicable in other areas. And so by breaking it up into small chunks, then your training management, training tracking is a lot easier. So once you kind of decided which kind of job roles you want to identify, then you're going to identify subject matter experts. And the subject matter experts are very high performing incumbent workers. And they have the knowledge, skills, abilities required to be successful in the role. And it's really important that they're recognized and respected by other people, because when they put and say, this is what you got to know for this job, there's a lot more buying, because you've all worked with folks that claim to be an expert on something or seem to be know-it-all on everything, but everyone just, when they talk, they kind of roll their eyes, and that immediately puts kind of a ineffectual taint on the training before it ever gets rolled out. So if you're very knowledgeable but hated, you're not likely to get a lot of acceptance. And the subject expert may be the ones doing the training, or they could just be developing the training, because sometimes folks who know a job really well aren't really that effective at training. They don't necessarily good at standing up, talking, and all of those things. So then you're going to facilitate what we'll call a DACM, developing a curriculum. And the process, it's a structured approach, and you identify the knowledge, skills, and abilities, as well as the competencies that are required. And then use the DACM for planning, prioritization, and tracking. Now, what often happens when you have training professionals, they have a DACM, they go through the process, and then they put that on the back shelf as if it's something that never gets used again. And in my experience, it actually is the most important thing you're ever going to do. And if you do nothing else but do the DACM and create a checklist, and don't ever create a single document or anything beyond that, but just use it as a checklist to go over and train somebody on, then you're almost going to always get at least 75% of the way there. And in my experience, the 80% done is way better than 100% talked about. And oftentimes people with these really ambitious plans to create these training programs and training content, and they spend months and months developing and spend lots and lots of money, and they maybe get one or two things out, and then they run out of money, or the priorities change, or the person changes jobs, and then it goes nowhere. So the developing the curriculum, the DACM, is what you use to develop your qualification checklist. So when we get into this, all right, duties. So the general areas or competencies that a successful worker in an occupation demonstrates to perform on an ongoing basis. And so you identify the duties and you identify the tasks. And a work activity that has a definite beginning and end and is observable. And so the overall area might be something like car maintenance, and the duty is to maintain your car, and then the task is inspecting the tires. And so you break it down and try to get it down to if it has a definite steps, beginning, middle, and end, then we'll call it a task. And a duty is a broad area of, it's maybe my duty is programming or process design, and then there's different tasks associated with doing it. So you identify the areas or categories that are required by the role, and so this is part of the DACM process. And don't limit yourself to the technical duties only, right? So you want to think about the duty, the equipment, the functions of the job, and depending on the organization we're working with, we oftentimes just go to the workplace and we walk around and we ask questions like a 5-year-old. Well, what is this? What is that? What do you do with this? And you make a list of the different duties or items, and you want to start with foundational skills and build up to higher level. And some of the examples, principles of understanding, safety, housekeeping, machinery, customer relations. These are all kind of just general areas of duties. Now, if I'm going to develop a really in-depth organization, there's different levels of hierarchy of knowledge. And say I want to make you the world's best automotive engineer, and you've never really been around cars or even worked much with cars in the past. But my goal is to create the world's best automotive engineers. The first thing I would do is start with overview and theory. The principles, the processes, the systems, general things that a lot of these things you might have gotten in school or in college or somewhere else, but we want to make sure you've got them. You hire for some of these and then you don't train them, because you expect them to come in with the knowledge existing already. And then once you understand the overall principles and theories, then you teach systems. And a system is a series of components that does something specific beginning to end. All right, so the car is not a system. There's many subsystems. And you could say the car is a system because it gets you from point A to point B. And the engine would be a subsystem because the engine by itself, not hooked up to the drivetrain, would, unless the goal was to convert oxygen into carbon monoxide, it's not serving a useful function. And so you think about the overview, principles, systems, then the controls and logic of how those things all interact. Then you teach operations of how to operate a car, understanding all of those elements below. Then you teach troubleshooting and maintenance, and then you can teach design. Now, what often happens is we'll bring people in that into an organization, they don't have all of this foundational information, and we start teaching them tasks. Do this, do that, push this, call that. This is how you answer the front phone. all of these kind of piecemeal things, and they don't understand some of the principles behind the why, what they're doing. We'll bring in folks for maintenance that have never been operators, and then they start working on things that are symptoms and not root causes. And then we bring engineers in to design things to make it better. They never maintained it, they never operated, and then they create these things that people don't enjoy operating. It's very difficult, or it's hard to work on. And so you want to look at this hierarchy of knowledge. Now, the same hierarchy can be applied to technology, where you have the overview and theory, systems and knowledge, controls and logic, and then you have users who are doing the operations. And the help desk is doing troubleshooting and maintenance. And the programmers are doing design. But oftentimes we have programmers that don't have a lot of sympathy for the operators. And I've been involved with setting up lots of ERP implementations, lots of CRM implementations, and other things like that. And the training consists of, I'm going to teach this task. Okay, this is how you create a work order. That's how you create this. And it's a series of tasks. It's all kind of a memory-based thing. And they don't understand the background or why things are important. And so people may not be as apt to do the elements that are essential for your programs or your processes to work. They really need this information because it actually helps something 3 things away or 5 things down the road. But the operator saying, yeah, it's no big deal. And then they don't put the thoughts into it. If you really help your operators, your users understand the principles of why and how it's tied in, it actually makes them way better users and gives you better feedback and less likely to have problems. Then you tell your help desk to understand how the operator interfaces with it, and then your programmers, if they understand what the help desk needs or that level, and then the users, you have a much more robust program. And then getting here with, why do we train people, bring them in and just throw a bunch of stuff at them and not teach them these foundations and principles? It comes back to the way, at least in the Western industrial side, our workforce developed. Back in the day, it's Henry Ford, in early 1900s, there was a large immigrant workforce. There was a lot of people coming in, and the way they thought about it was the workforce was expendable. The workforce was something that you come in, and so they broke down the training and the jobs to the simplest components. Okay, your job is to stand here on this assembly line and put these tires on, and your job is to then tighten the nuts up, or however they did it, and then it made it very efficient. But the stable management was always there. So if the line broke down or something went wrong in the plant, they would go talk to the management that was more stable and online, and then it would fix the problem. And to give you a feel for this, because it's not that uncommon today with the people who are rotating through, they come in, they go, they come in, they go, and then the management is there answering problems and solving questions. And so today, it's the workforce that's stable, and it's the management that rotates through. And so part of this thing is getting something called T-shaped skill sets. And what I mean by that, when I talk about a broad category of what you want to train, is you want to have skill sets that cover a broad elements of what's successful to remain. Okay, so a lot of times people are very expertise in one of their jobs, one of their areas, very, very knowledgeable, but they don't necessarily know the human factors, the business factors, and all those things. So when you are training, you want to include all of these other things to make you more effective in your job. And so with the T-shaped skill sets, to be successful, you need to have an understanding of your management of yourself, your professional technical skills, social skills, management of others, and then leadership skills. And you grow in your job from management, professional, social skills, and then management of others, leading. So for instance, when you are hiring a new person and they are coming in to the organization, in the interview process, the first thing they do is ask you, tell me about yourself. They're asking about how well and you manage yourself. Then they'll ask you things like your professional technical skills. What do you know about the job? And then how well do you work with this? Tell me a time you did that. So the next time you ever interview for a job, want to change jobs, then I want you to think about these buckets of competencies. Because to be successful, Cornell just did a study of a broad portion of the workforce, and the number one determinant of individual success was self-awareness and self-management. And oftentimes it is those simple things that cause, you've all known somebody who's technically brilliant, but they're really, really difficult to work with. And so when you're creating the training and you're creating expectations to create a high-performing team, don't forget these other spheres of competence. And so going back to this concept of the T-shaped skill set, lots of people are a mile deep and an inch wide. So to be really effective, broaden out your knowledge. So I started out my job, my initial in nuclear engineering. And then from nuclear engineering, I was going to go further into that, mechanical engineering and all of that. And I said, and so I started learning the human factors and the sociology, psychology side of it. And then instead of going and getting a master's in that, I went and got an MBA. So it's a very weird, broad skill set, but allows you to relate to all people in different levels. So when you're thinking about your own professional development, when you're thinking about how you want to grow in your career, don't just go further, deeper into something you know. Really work on something that you're not comfortable with. Get this T-shaped skill set so that it makes you more marketable, more hireable, because in today's job market, the best security is your own employability. And the value you bring with having a T-shaped skill set helps you grow immensely. And when you're thinking about your T-shaped skill set, think of these 5 competencies, okay? Manage myself, professional technical skills, social skills, manage others and budgets and things, and then leadership skills. And so when you're developing a checklist, you want to think about a broader category than just this simple ... You want to think of what they need for the role. And you could actually break these into separate roles. You could create different checklists for the self, and professional, the team skills. You could break those up as well. And depending on the situation, you want to make what makes sense. You don't want to create too many little small buckets of things, but if some skills are transferable across many different jobs, many different departments, then it's a good idea to break them up into small, little, more bite-sized chunks. And so these are the lists that we often start with anybody to develop. And like I said, using this methodology, you'll be able to literally develop an effective checklist and implement programs within weeks and not months or years. So all of this kind of comes back to this whole concept of what we call the performance triangle. And to be sustainable, your organization needs to think about profitability, sustainability, the human factors. So we have systems and technology, we have business acumen, human factors. It all exists within a world of management, and then leadership to kind of spark it. My perception, my understanding from decades doing this kind of stuff is success is about 10% management and 10% leadership and 90% management, because oftentimes we have people who want important jobs who are unwilling to do hard jobs. And so they're not willing to do the things that really need to get done. They want to go to meetings and be seen, but they're not doing the really down in the dirt stuff that needs to be done. So when you have this in mind, you kind of create these buckets. And then with the group, you get together your subject matter experts and you brainstorm. Everyone kind of thinks of independently what they're going to do. And then you share those ideas, you refine, you combine. I often take and put the label of the role up, and then I'll put yellow stickies. I still use a lot of yellow stickies because that's so much better than just some of the computer-based programs and things like that. Sometimes technology solutions are not as efficient. Once I get it set up and kind of designed, then I'll transfer it into checklist, or use Word document or an Excel document, or using Visio for a process flow. But the yellow sticky method is really effective. And when you're detailing out a job, all right, a task, I want them to have these things: a verb, doing thing, modifier, and then a noun. So manage the project budget. So what are you doing? You're managing the project and the budget. So every one of them, because some people would just, write project budget or Ruby on Rails skills or something, but you want to break it out so that it has a verb, what you're doing, the modifier, and the noun. And I know that sounds really basic, but if you keep it in mind, it makes your process way easier, way faster, and more usable. Simple. All right, so I used initially this kind of basic automotive care. So the duty is basic automotive care. All right, this is an example. My job is to maintain my car. And the tasks involved in maintaining my car are check the tire pressure, check the oil, down the line. And so each one of these individual tasks has steps. And then here's another thing that's essential. If you're worried about safety, and you're worried about workplace safety, don't think about hazards associated at the duty or the job. Tasks is where the hazards exist. And so if you think about, I'm changing the tire, the first task might be jack up the car. And the first step might be jack up the car. And then from jacking up the car, I'm going to break loose the lug nuts and so on and so forth. And there's different hazards, different things of getting people hurt at that lower level that people don't necessarily think about. And so, working with some of my clients, one was a major transportation company, and we reduced their accident rate from a 5.8 to a 0.1. And if you're familiar with any accident rate kind of statistics, 5.8 means 5 or 6 people out of every 100 are getting seriously hurt or killed every year, and 0.1 is way better. And so think about it when you're thinking about safety, and if you're putting hazards and things like that into your training, and you want to identify those from a safety perspective, then you need to really think about it at the task level and at the steps. All right. So just a little side note, that's not necessarily around the training side, but that's how this tool and this process can really help you change behaviors and improve workplace productivity, safety, and everything. So once you have the tasks developed and identified, then you kind of incorporate them in checklists. So we took those basic tasks that we have for the basic automotive care, and we put them into this checklist. And then oftentimes our clients will use levels like, a very simple one is this, a little bit more complex are these. And then if you're going to get more complex, it changes the level. And then the way the checklist is used is the person goes out and with a subject matter expert. Now, we may or may not have any kind of written procedure or additional information for any of these elements. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But just having the list will get you so far, because think about some of your past jobs when you just showed up a new company, a new organization, and they said, hey, welcome aboard. It's like, okay, well, how am I going to train? Well, you're going to work with Sam for a while. And so you sit with Sam and you work with Sam, and then Sam says, okay, you got any questions? No, I don't think I got any questions. I think I understand it pretty well. Okay, well, that's great. I'm going on vacation. So Sam goes on vacation. All of a sudden, you got all kinds of questions. So by having a checklist, then you have all kinds of questions to ask. Yeah, Sam, we didn't talk about this. Oh, okay, let me show you that. And so the checklist seems like so simple, but it is so important, and it is actually will get you, like I said, 75–80% of the way there. Also, we've done some testing in which just having the checklist reduced the time to qualify by half to 2/3. So by having the questions, like if you were, in high school and they said, hey, these are the questions you're going to have to answer to be good in life, how much further would you be ahead instead of just stumbling along figuring out life, without a checklist? So once you get done, you're going to group the tasks by systems, processes, or duty areas. Never, never, never list tasks by chronologically. Okay, I do these daily, I do these hourly, no, don't do that. Don't list them alphabetically. Don't list them in order of complexity. You can go complexity within a higher thing of a system, like I understand principles and systems and list that hierarchy we listed before, but you don't want to just put all complex things over here and all simple things over there. And I'll tell you why. All right. We're going to do a little experiment. Okay. I have a timer here, and I want you to remember as many of these as you can in the next 20 seconds. It's a test. All right. So you're looking at this. All right. Now close your eyes or look away from the screen. And how many can you recall? Kind of difficult. Now, if I take the same kind of stuff, we do this again, the exact same items. Now, I'm going to only give you 10 seconds. How many can you recall? Many, many more. So much more, because the brain actually works like a filing cabinet. And by having the filing cabinet, it is storing those things together that are like. And your brain works in kind of mysterious ways, in that you may have filed things. Have you ever heard a song and then you walk in and you hear the song, it takes you back to memories? Well, that memory is filed under that song. And different smells, like the smell of baking bread or something, may trigger a memory. And so by putting things into categories, duties, roles, systems, processes, then you actually help people recall them way easier and then recreate and learn faster. So a little trick there. So once you've developed your task list, then you can develop and link resources. So, you created these tasks for the DACM process. And so you're going to have dozens of these things. And then you're going to say, well, how do I develop this? So some people just start at the top and start developing procedures and processes and stuff like that. And if you can use a prioritization method of what you really need to develop, then it'll make your time and use of time and resources way easier. So there's two effective methods of prioritization: equipment functionality and then operational criticality. So when we're going to decide what we need to create, it could be functionality. So if it is a system or a process, how do you start it up? How do you shut it down? Any kind of emergency changes, essential maintenance. If you're doing a program, then you could have things like logging in, setting up, starting, whatever they are, but you kind of prioritize them and you list these things that need to be done. But if you're not sure what to prioritize, then use this list. Number one, if it's safety, then you might need to, a task is really dangerous if it's not done in a specific way. criticality, and that's kind of, it's got to be done exactly this way. So if I'm doing, say, a chemical titration, then it's not really that hard. But if I don't do it exactly right, it's not going to be accurate. And so I want to write a procedure that tells me exactly step by step how much to do. It's really critical. Now, difficulty, if it's a one button or a simple couple of things like that, then I might not need a written procedure. I don't need anything except put it on the task list. Make sure it's on the task list, because a lot of people don't list these things because it's too simple or whatnot. Put on the task list, say, hey, show me how to do this, right? So, but if it is more complex and very difficult, then you might want write a procedure or a policy for it. And then frequency. And what I mean by frequency, I'm actually talking about infrequency, because if you do it every day and it's something you do regularly, you may not need a policy or procedure because you do it all the time. But if it's something you only do once a year or once every 5 years, and the guy who did it last left the group, then write it down. Put down some kind of documentation that shows you how to do it. So if you utilize a matrix and you put a score to these things, maybe a 4-point score to a 5-point score for each of these elements, you kind of rank them and then you add them up. Then you decide which is the highest priority to develop policies, process, procedures, and things beyond that. So once you have that, okay, make it as easy as possible to connect. If you have a shared drive, put it on there. Our system actually connects the resources to the item. So if I go, safety, change a tire, I can just click on it and it brings up that step-by-step procedure, easy access. So where we did the training, people also use it for access to the documentation, so that's easy to find. And in the availability, also make it so it's really simple. This is a policy or a procedure that we did for how you split roles in a paper company. And so the job aids are very visual, and then the safety is built into it. And then we link these to the task lists so that they're easy to use, easy to recall, just in time, right at your fingertips. And then this checklist that you've developed goes way beyond training. You can use it for hiring, orientation, development within your level, promotion to the next level, performance reviews, management of change. And let me kind of think through this. So I've got this checklist for this job or this role that I'm going to be hiring you for. And so when I'm hiring you, I actually use this thing to say, hey, what level do you know, and where am I going to bring you in at, and interview you to say, can you do the job? Because oftentimes hiring done by HR is just using this very generic job description that's posted on Indeed or wherever you're posting your jobs. So if you're using the checklist, you can kind of go through and say, does the person know this? And then you can determine, what level they're coming in at. Are they coming in at an associate level, a tech, or a senior? How are you going to do this? Then use it for orientation on how you get them on board, and say, hey, actually, I encourage folks to create an orientation checklist. So these are the things you need to know for, this is, holiday pay, this is your vacation schedule, this is the way to report in sick, and you actually just list all of these things so that the person is on board. And then as they develop, they increase, and then you can say, okay, when you get done with all of these things, then you're going to be a level 1, and if you want to move up to a level 2, this other checklist is what you got to do. You got to demonstrate your proficiency in level 1. And so that leads right into the promotion to the next level. And then also your performance reviews. So oftentimes the performance reviews, you go in and you look at your manager looks at you and say, well, how'd you do? I did good. But if you look back the checklist and says, hey, you're doing this well, you're doing these well, you need to get better at doing this, it actually helps you with the overall performance reviews. And if you're having to write your own performance review, go back and look at your roles and look at your checklists and say, all right, manager, I did this, I can do these things, I grew in these things, and it helps you in that way. And then it tracks the ongoing training and program, because if I change the checklist, now, because oftentimes we have this concept of once trained, always trained. And so if they, are in the job, they don't get any more training. They just kind of, if it's on their own initiative or whatnot, they learn it. But if you have this checklist kind of principles and systems in place, and you add something new that's a requirement, well, that person who was 100% trained now down to like 98% trained. So it really helps you with those things. So the checklists are the most effective, efficient, simplest, and they're so simple. The idea is so simple, but everyone always skips it. They want to just go develop all kinds of, computer-based training and LMSs and all this other stuff. The checklist will get you so far. So just to kind of summarize this, and we'll open it up for questions and discussions. You're going to select an occupation or role that you want to do. And remember, an occupation is a job and a role is something you do. So you have one job, you may have many roles. You identify your subject matter experts. You facilitate the developing a curriculum process where you create these detailed qualification or training checklists listing all the knowledge, skills, and availables. And remember, T-shaped skill sets. Don't just do this single narrow focus, broadly what they need to do. This is what you need to do for, manage yourself, job, working with others. Spell it out. Make it very clear. And then you develop and link the resources, prioritize on what you're going to develop. You implement it. You assign the subject matter experts to help document training, train the trainer kind of thing. And then you track your progress and you keep managing, tracking, revising, and refreshing. So if you're doing a project and you're going to roll this out, you're going to do so much better if you can roll it out to your clients with a checklist and say, hey, when you guys are done, you're going to be able to do these things on this procedure, this process, this program, whatever you've got. And then as you go through the training process, don't sign people off until they can, in fact, do what's on the checklist. And then you'll identify gaps, you'll identify areas, and you'll make your process so much easier, so much effective. And honestly, you can create training in weeks, not months, not years. Okay, well, that's it for me. You're welcome to set a follow-up. Thanks a lot.
Jamison, a very special thank you for presenting with us.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.